Miami, Florida, 2004. An 80-year-old man lies in bed, knowing he is dying. His son, St. John, is by his side. The old man asks him to turn on a tape recorder. What he says over the next few hours, his son would later call the hardest conversation of his life. The dying man is E. Howard Hunt, a CIA officer with 30 years of service, an organizer of coup d'etat in Guatemala and Cuba, convicted for the Watergate hotel break-in, a man whom Richard Nixon, in his secret recordings, referred to as a problem that cannot be opened. On the tape, Hunt slowly, with pauses, names. Cord Meyer, a high-ranking CIA officer. David Atlee Phillips, CIA, Chief of Operations for Latin America. William Harvey, a CIA officer, supervisor of anti-Castro operations. Frank Sturgis, an agent, participant in the Bay of Pigs operation. And, quietly, almost in a whisper, Lyndon Baines Johnson, the Vice President of the United States. St. John asks directly, "Dad, were you involved in the assassination of Kennedy?" A pause. "I knew about the plan. I was invited. I declined active participation. But I knew." E. Howard Hunt passed away in January 2007. The tapes were released in Rolling Stone a few months later. The CIA offered no comment. To understand why one of America's most secretive men decided to speak only on his deathbed, one must go back 40 years. To an office where uniformed officers presented the president with a folder containing a plan so chilling it would make your blood run cold. We will now reveal the darkest oddities surrounding Kennedy's death, and who was truly behind it. But let's not start with the shots. Let's begin with a document that American generals brought to their president 20 months before Dallas. March 13th, 1962. Washington, D.C., General Lyman Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, placed a folder on the president's desk. The classification? Top secret. The title? Operation Northwoods. Inside was a detailed plan for false flag provocations designed to create a pretext for conflict with Cuba. Concrete proposals, written not by conspiracy journalists, but by active American military personnel. Destroy an American naval vessel near Cuba and blame Havana, mirroring the sinking of the battleship USS Maine in 1898, which provided a pretext for war with Spain. Orchestrate a series of attacks on American citizens on American soil, in Miami, in Washington, and present them as sabotage by Cuban agents. Shoot down an unmanned aircraft over the ocean, declaring it a civilian airliner with passengers. Provide the press with fake evidence of Castro's involvement. All of this was intended to make American public opinion demand war. This is not a theory. Operation Northwoods has been declassified. The document is available today in the U.S. National Archives. It can be read. Kennedy closed the folder. He removed Lemnitzer from his position. And it was precisely then, not after the Bay of Pigs, but at this very moment, that an unbridgeable chasm formed between the president and America's military intelligence community. Now, about the Bay of Pigs, because it was this event that turned the chasm into a war. A year before Operation Northwoods, something else happened. April 1961. Cuba. Brigade 2, 506, 1500 CIA-trained Cuban exiles landed at the Bay of Pigs. A year of preparation. American instructors. American weapons. Clear promises. Once it began, Washington would provide air cover. There was no air cover. Kennedy canceled the airstrikes at the last minute. Without air support, the brigade was doomed within 72 hours. Those not cut down on the beach were captured. Interrogations, dungeons. At CIA headquarters, officers watched the unfolding disaster and drew one conclusion. The president had betrayed them. Or so it seemed to them. In reality, Kennedy was furious for a different reason. He had been drawn into a doomed operation, with the true chances of success concealed. The CIA had painted a picture of victory for him, and instead suffered a rout. "How could I have been so stupid?" Kennedy reportedly told his aides. He fired CIA Director Allen Dulles. He fired his deputy, Richard Bissell, he fired Deputy Director Charles Cabell. And then, in a small circle, he uttered a phrase that was never forgotten at Langley. "I want to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds." E. Howard Hunt, then a serving CIA officer, would later tell his son, "Your father was a staunch opponent of Kennedy, as were most in the agency. We considered him a coward and a traitor. But the CIA was not acting alone. It had allies with very specific financial interests and very specific grievances against Kennedy. Until 1959, Havana was a gold mine for American organized crime. Casinos, hotels, nightclubs. The mafia controlled Cuba's gambling industry, earning hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Bosses, Santo Traficante in Florida, Carlos Marcello in New Orleans, and Sam Giancana in Chicago viewed Cuba as part of their business empire. Castro came and kicked them all out. He nationalized their assets. No compensation, no negotiations. The CIA and the Mafia found each other naturally. In August 1960, as documented by the Church Committee, the agency officially contacted Giancana and Traficante. The proposal: eliminate Castro, get Cuba back. The Mafia agreed immediately. 3 groups with overlapping interests: CIA officers who lost agents in the Bay of Pigs, Cuban exiles who lost brothers and fathers there, Mafia bosses who lost hundreds of millions in business, and all 3 had a common enemy in the White House. Now, add another circumstance that official history tends to overlook. Because Kennedy, simultaneously with his war against the CIA, opened a second front, against the Mafia. And it was this that ultimately sealed his fate. Robert Kennedy, the president's younger brother and attorney general, launched an unprecedented campaign against organized crime in America. Hundreds of criminal cases, wiretaps, surveillance. Carlos Marcello was deported to Guatemala directly from his office, without warning, without trial. He was literally put on a plane. Marcello returned a few months later, and according to an FBI agent embedded in his circle, he said at a meeting with trusted associates, "Don't hit the dog that bites you. Kill the one who sicked him on you." The dog was Robert. The one who sicked him on them was John. Around the same time, Traficante told an acquaintance, whose testimony would later be included in congressional investigation materials, "Kennedy won't be reelected. He won't be reelected because he'll be removed." This was several months before November 1963. Now, November 22nd. But not about the shots. It's about what was happening around them, because the details don't add up. The presidential motorcade route through Dallas was published in local newspapers well in advance, standard practice. But this route contained one unusual element, a turn onto Dealey Plaza, which forced the limousine to slow almost to a stop and move in a direction contrary to standard security protocols. Who approved the route remains a subject of debate. Minutes before the motorcade appeared, railroad dispatcher Lee Bowers, who was in a tower with a direct view of the grassy knoll to the right of the road, noticed 2 men in the bushes. After the shots, they disappeared. His testimony was included in the Warren Commission materials and ignored. In 1966, Bowers died in a car accident on a perfectly straight road. There were no other cars involved. Witness Julia Ann Mercer saw a pickup truck stop near the grassy knoll an hour before the shots. A man unloaded a long case. She later identified the driver from a photograph. It was Jack Ruby, the man who, 2 days later, would walk into the police station corridor and silence the main suspect. Her testimony disappeared from official records. It was later found, with altered signatures. She insisted until the end of her life. The documents had been forged. Now, about Oswald. Because the official version paints one picture, while the facts suggest something entirely different. Lee Harvey Oswald, according to the official version, was an unstable loner, sympathetic to communism. But here's what doesn't fit that portrait. Oswald served at Atsugi Air Base in Japan, one of the most highly classified U.S. Navy facilities. U-2 reconnaissance flights over Soviet territory were conducted from there. A private in the Marine Corps at such a base had access to information not shown to most officers. Then he defected to the USSR. Soviet intelligence interrogated him. He revealed information about the U-2 program. The Soviets tracked a U-2 and shot down Gary Power's plane precisely after this, in 1960. Then he returned to the US. The Soviet government returned his passport. The American government asked no questions, no investigation, no charges of treason. That's not how defectors are typically returned. In the summer of 1963 in New Orleans, Oswald aggressively distributed leaflets in support of the Cuban Revolution. The address of his office matched that of Guy Bannister, a former FBI and CIA agent who coordinated anti-Castro operations. A fervent supporter of Castro worked from the office of a man dedicated to overthrowing Castro. The CIA had maintained a file on Oswald since 1959. It concealed this from the Warren Commission. This fact only came to light with the partial declassification of documents. After his arrest, Oswald told reporters, "I didn't shoot anybody. They arrested me because I lived in the Soviet Union. I'm just a patsy." 48 hours later, he was silenced forever. Now, Jack Ruby. That's a separate story, because his appearance in the police station corridor shatters any explanation of coincidence. Ruby was a Dallas nightclub owner. According to FBI records, he had documented connections to individuals in the inner circles of Trafficante and Marcello. In the months leading up to November 1963, there was a series of phone calls to figures involved in mafia cases, records of which still exist. On November 24th, he entered the guarded basement of the Dallas Police Headquarters, a facility with maximum security measures on the day the president's suspected assassin was held there, and, live on national television, shot Oswald in the abdomen. The official explanation for his presence there: he slipped past security. During interrogation, Ruby told investigators, "If you knew the whole truth of what's going on here, you would understand why I can't talk about it in Dallas." He requested to be moved to Washington, to a safe place. His request was denied. Shortly before he died of cancer in prison in 1967, he gave an interview. One phrase from it became famous: "The truth will never come out, because those who came to power will never give it up." And now, about Vietnam, because this is where the biggest motive lies, and the biggest beneficiary. On October 11th, 1963, 6 weeks before Dallas, Kennedy signed National Security Action Memorandum No. 263. Its content: withdraw 1,000 military advisors from Vietnam by the end of the year. Conclude the main U.S. military presence by 1965. Kennedy had repeatedly stated in private conversations, confirmed by advisors' records, that he had no intention of sending combat troops to Southeast Asia. Never. On November 26, 1963, 4 days after Dallas, the new president, Lyndon Johnson, signed National Security Action Memorandum No. 273. It contained something Kennedy's memo did not: authorization for planning offensive operations against North Vietnam by U.S. forces themselves, not just South Vietnamese allies. Then, August 1964, the Tonkin Incident, an attack by North Vietnamese torpedo boats on an American destroyer in international waters. Congress gave Johnson a full carte blanche for war. It would later be revealed the second attack, which served as the official pretext for escalation, never happened. Secretary of Defense McNamara would admit this shortly before his death. By 1968, 580,000 American soldiers were fighting in South Vietnam. Defense corporations, Lockheed, Boeing, General Dynamics, Raytheon, received government contracts worth hundreds of billions of dollars. These were the very corporations Kennedy warned about in his speeches, calling them the military-industrial complex, calling them a threat to democracy. And it is here, in this triangle of the CIA, the Mafia, and the military-industrial complex, that the conspiracy theory ceases to be just a theory. In 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, concluded its 4-year investigation. The official conclusion, not from journalists, not from conspiracy theorists, but from a legislative body of the United States, President John F. Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. The committee directly pointed to the possible involvement of organized crime. It directly indicated that the CIA had withheld information from the investigation. It explicitly stated, acoustic analyses recorded 4 shots, not 3. The 4th came from the direction of the grassy knoll. This is an official conclusion of the United States Congress. It has never been disproven. It was simply filed away. In that same year, 1979, just before his scheduled testimony to a Senate committee, Sam Giancana was shot several times in the head in his own kitchen. His security heard nothing. Johnny Rosselli, another mafia intermediary in CIA anti-Castro operations, who had agreed to cooperate with the investigation, was found in a metal barrel at the bottom of Miami Bay. Both incidents occurred days before their scheduled testimonies. 2 men. Both were supposed to speak. Both were silenced. The documents. Because what is being done with them today is, in itself, an answer to the question, what's inside? Under a 1992 law, all materials from the Kennedy assassination investigation were to be declassified by 2017, 25 years later. In 2017, Trump partially declassified them. He blocked a portion at the request of the CIA and FBI. In 2022, Biden again extended the classification. The same justification. National security interests. 60 years. All direct participants have long passed away. What exactly in these folders threatens America's national security today? From what did emerge? The CIA knew about Oswald long before the assassination and deliberately concealed the extent of this knowledge from the Warren Commission. Agent George Joannides, the man who coordinated anti-Castro operations in Miami, maintained contact with a Cuban organization that Oswald was affiliated with. When Congress investigated the assassination in 1979, Joannides was appointed by the CIA as its official liaison to that investigation. The agency placed its own man to oversee the investigation into its own possible involvement. Congressmen called this an unprecedented conflict of interest. The CIA remained silent. Howard Hunt named names on his deathbed. His son published the tapes. Rolling Stone magazine ran the story on its front page. The CIA offered no comment. Hunt's family partially disputed the authenticity of the recordings. A portion of the family confirmed them. A 1985 lawsuit, when Hunt sued a publication that accused him of involvement in the assassination, concluded with a jury verdict in favor of the publication. The foreperson of the jury spoke to the press and said, "We found that the CIA was involved in the assassination of Kennedy, and that Hunt was part of it." This was not a criminal conviction. It was a civil trial. It held no legal force. But these were ordinary American citizens who heard evidence from both sides and rendered their verdict. Dealey Plaza in Dallas today is a tourist attraction. The 6th floor of the warehouse has been turned into a museum. On the asphalt are white markings indicating where the president fell. The grassy knoll to the right stands silently, as it did that day. The archives are partially classified. The names on E. Howard Hunt's tape, they haven't gone anywhere. And the question for which official America has no answer is not who pulled the trigger. The question is, who decided it was time?